Okay, let's start with a question that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction. What if the biggest mystery out there, consciousness itself, isn't just locked away inside our brains? What if the answer is written in the very code of life, and our DNA is actually a receiver, tuning into the fabric of reality? Yeah, let's dive into this truly mind-bending idea.
It all kicks off with this huge puzzle, one that comes from the absolute cutting edge of science. You see, we've gotten unbelievably good at reading and even printing DNA. But there's this massive catch, a question that has the world's best synthetic biologists totally stumped. And that question leads us straight into this deep biological paradox. We can copy life piece for piece, but we don't actually seem to understand the instructions. It's like we've been given a book written in an alien language. We can trace the letters perfectly, but we have no idea what they mean.
So let's break this down, because it's pretty wild. On one side, our technical skill is amazing. We can synthesize a DNA sequence from chemicals, a perfect copy. We can even stick that synthetic DNA into a living cell. But on the other side, we can't design a functional genome from scratch. We can't even really predict why a structure that evolved naturally actually works. We are expert copycats, but we are clueless composers.
And this right here is the perfect analogy. It's like we can build a perfect replica of a radio antenna just by measuring every little part. But that doesn't mean we have any clue about the physics of radio waves or electromagnetism. It strongly suggests there's some deeper principle at play in our DNA, something way beyond just storing data, and we are completely missing it.
So, if DNA isn't just a biological hard drive, then what else could it possibly be? Well, the clues might have been hiding in plain sight this whole time, in a series of really strange, unexplained properties that scientists have been observing for years.
Okay, so check out these weird properties. First, DNA has a fractal structure, a repeating pattern at different scales, like a snowflake or a coastline. Second, it actually glows. It emits organized particles of light called biophotons. Third, and this is a big one, it seems to hold on to fragile quantum states in the hot, chaotic mess of a living cell, which by all rights should be impossible. And finally, that double-helix shape, all life on Earth uses it. Why? These don't feel like random quirks. They look a lot more like design features for a function we don't yet understand.
So, let's focus on that fractal bit. What kind of technology uses a self-repeating fractal geometry? A fractal antenna. Its specific shape is what allows it to pick up signals across a huge range of frequencies, way more than just a simple straight antenna. And guess what? DNA's structure fits that description perfectly.
And what about that glowing? Well, these biophotons aren't just random sparks of heat. They're coherent, which means they're organized, almost like tiny biological laser beams. And get this, scientists have traced the primary source of these emissions directly back to our DNA. So it's not just sitting there storing code, it seems to be actively interacting with light. And this is not some tiny, trivial effect we're talking about. Living tissue emits up to 1,000 of these photons per square centimeter every single second. That is way, way higher than what random chemical reactions or heat can explain. Something organized and light-based is happening inside ourselves, and DNA is right at the center of it.
So how do all these bizarre puzzle pieces fit together? You've got the copy-paste problem, DNA's fractal shape, its weird quantum abilities, and the fact that it's literally glowing. Well, when you put them all on the table, they seem to point toward a radical, and I mean radical, new theory of consciousness.
It's called the Informational Field Consciousness Theory, or IFCT for short. Here's how it works. Step 1. It proposes that at the most fundamental level, reality isn't matter or energy, but a vast field of pure information. Step 2. Our DNA acts as a biological fractal antenna, perfectly shaped to receive information from this field. And step 3. Our brain isn't the creator of consciousness, but more like a processor that decodes this incoming signal, creating the rich, subjective experience we call reality. So your unique self is just what that universal field feels like when viewed through the filter of your specific body.
This is such a brilliant way to tackle one of the biggest philosophical problems. If we're all just tapping into one single field, why do we feel like separate individuals? Well, the theory uses this beautiful analogy. The field is like a single beam of pure white light. Each one of our bodies, our DNA, and our brain is a unique prism, and each prism creates its own distinct individual rainbow, its own conscious experience from that exact same source of light.
Now, I know what you might be thinking.
This all sounds pretty philosophical, maybe a little out there, but here's the most exciting part of this theory. It's not. It makes specific, concrete, and most importantly, testable predictions that we can either prove or disprove in a lab. It moves the conversation from what if to, okay, let's find out.
So, let's look at the first test. This one focuses entirely on the physical shape of the DNA molecule. What would happen to an organism's consciousness if we could physically mess with the geometry of its antenna without changing a single letter of the genetic code it carries?
Okay, look at how clear the difference is here. This new theory, IFCT, predicts that you would see problems with consciousness almost immediately as soon as you bend that DNA antenna out of shape. The signal gets distorted first. But a standard materialist view, the idea that consciousness is just a product of brain chemistry, would predict something totally different. It would say nothing should happen to consciousness until way later, when that bent DNA actually starts causing problems making proteins. It's all about the timing.
All right, here's a second test, and this one is even more clever, using some really futuristic tech. Scientists can now create organisms with an expanded genetic alphabet. So, using 6 or even 8 different chemical letters instead of the usual 4. So the big question is, what does that do to consciousness?
And once again, the predictions are polar opposites. The IFCT says that as long as you preserve that all-important double-helix antenna shape, consciousness should be perfectly normal. Who cares if there are new letters? It's the antenna's geometry that matters. Materialism, on the other hand, would pretty much have to predict that adding brand new information to the fundamental code must alter consciousness in some deep way. It's a fantastic, clear-cut experiment to see what really matters more, the geometry or the code.
So let's just zoom out for a moment. If any of these predictions actually hold up in the lab, the implications aren't just for biology. They would force us to completely rethink the nature of reality, our place in the universe, and what it even means to be a conscious being.
This chart really puts it all into perspective, showing how IFCT stacks up against the other major theories of consciousness. You've got materialism, which is easy to test but just can't explain subjective experience. You have panpsychism, the idea that everything is conscious, but it's really hard to test. But look at that bottom row. IFCT claims to solve the hard problem of consciousness philosophically while also being highly testable in a lab. That combination is its real superpower.
And the philosophical takeaway from all this is just, wow. If this theory is right, that solid, hard boundary we all feel between me and the rest of the universe, it's an artifact. It's a trick of our biological filter. The feeling of being a separate self is a beautiful, but ultimately illusory rainbow created by the prism of our own body.
So we end right back where we began, with this incredibly provocative question. Is the code of life not just a blueprint for building a body, but a receiver tuning into the symphony of the cosmos? We don't have the answer yet, but for the very first time, we might actually have a scientific way to find out.